I'll share some updates from the CCPE work group that has been, that just wrapped up a couple of weeks ago, but met about 4 times over the last couple of months. We have some emerging recommendations, both in practice and in policy, that we'll share. Then we'll offer a new resource from our innovation team. My colleague Danya will share this new work-based learning continuum for IT-specific pathways. And then we'll have a new feature tour through my colleague Dominique, and she will kind of give some updates on emerging features for the Success Network data dashboard, to also kind of collect feedback from you all of what would be helpful as folks who utilize the tool. Then we'll wrap up and be able to adjourn our policy committee meeting this morning. All right, so I'll pass it over to Emily with federal and state policy updates.
Thank you, Madeline. Yeah, so when you see the slides on the website, we'll link to the Ed Systems recap blog we just posted, but I'm going to run through just some quick updates, both about federal budget proposals, which obviously are still in flux, as well as recent federal action, and wrapping up the state legislative session and highlighting some of the stuff with both bills that passed, relevant bills that passed, as well as budget implications, et cetera, and then highlighting a little bit about some work coming out of the Lumina Foundation. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. And yeah, so, the federal proposed budget, the a while back, the fuller budget is now out. There are really substantial cuts to education across the board. Title I has been maintained, but basically everything else under ESSA has been consolidated into this block grant approach, which was something that we kind of anticipated when President Trump first started talking about consolidating or eliminating rather the U.S. Department of Education. This was one of the approaches that we sort of anticipated. So, there's elimination of a lot of different programs that provide wraparound supports for students who are coming to our schools with various needs and backgrounds. And so, but also overall, there's just substantial cuts to the funding. In addition to that, the reduction in force that's already happened is really substantially impacting how folks are in state agencies are able to interact with the state or the U.S. Department of Education and be able to get information, be able to proceed with their work. In higher ed, this has obviously been at the forefront of a lot of dialogue coming from the federal government. In the federal proposed budget, there are substantial cuts to the maximum Pell Awards. I believe it's about 23%, which will really significantly impact the ability of students to access higher education using leveraging federal aid, federal need-based aid. And also there are proposals around changing the qualifications for accessing Pell. So that will have kind of a multitude of effects on students being able to access higher education, students from low-income backgrounds in particular. There's a proposed reduction in federal work study. There's also, a proposed elimination of TRIO, Gear Up, and the Teacher Quality Partnership. All of these programs have been essential to access for students from a variety of backgrounds. And I know there's been a bipartisan fight on behalf of TRIO and Gear Up, for example, but we'll see how things end up playing out in the Senate. But right now, based on what has passed through the House and the proposals, it's just everything is pretty rough in terms of higher ed budget, in addition to sort of the general dialogue and other actions the Trump administration has been taking against specific higher ed institutions and more broadly against around how they manage their programming and all of that. The other thing we want to just highlight is cuts to the Institute of Education Sciences, both financially and really substantially in terms of reduction in force and NAEP assessments will have a substantial impact on our ability to understand what's happening in our schools. A lot of data that we are able to utilize at a state level even are data that come originally from federal collections. And so there's a lot of dialogue in the state. I know Advance Illinois has been convening some tables with advocacy and practitioner partners around how do we grapple with this new normal. But these cuts to data and research entities and programs and policies are really going to have a substantial impact, not only immediately, but for years to come in terms of what data are available, what kinds of questions we'll be able to answer about how we're serving students, and what their outcomes are. So just had to highlight those here. This is a bummer of a slide, but that's where we're at right now. If we can go to the next slide for notes on federal policy. There are detailed summaries from Ed Council on all of the myriad executive orders that the Trump administration has put out impacting education, whether it's from executive orders around apprenticeship to diversity, equity, and inclusion, to AI, et cetera. Ed Council has been really doing a good job of producing summaries of all of those. There's a bit of a mixed bag in terms of what those executive orders can and can't prompt entities to do in terms of their degree of power. But they do, I think broadly, there's general agreement that there's at a minimum a cooling effect of those, because that signals further action to come from the administration, whether through agency action or through, pursuing legislation. The Trump administration has also been pursuing a lot of legal action against various school districts, universities, et cetera, around a variety of things, including, a lot of stuff around diversity, inclusion, et cetera. And I also wanted to just flag that, the legal action everything is still very much in flux. And I feel like I've said this like 20 times in the last few months, but it's really true. We won't know. We will, as things continue to unfold, we will learn more. But the reality is that a lot of these cases are tied up in the courts, and there's nothing final about what the courts have decided. There's not really a lot that's final about what that is going to ultimately impact in terms of the universities or districts that have been impacted so far. I'll also just note that, other things that are happening, education is within a broader set of systems. And so all of the action around immigration enforcement, and certainly I know it's especially prominent in the news right now. Action around immigration enforcement is impacting schools in a number of ways, right? It's impacting children and their families. It's impacting school communities. It's impacting how people are navigating graduation ceremonies even right now. But also has impacts on workforce and our ability to staff different positions and all those kinds of things. The other note here is on Medicaid, which obviously directly impacts low-income families, but also impacts state budgets. So, for those of you who are less aware, when the federal government proposes to cut Medicaid, which is what's happening under this administration, the states have to find a way to pick up the bill for those costs in their states. And so Illinois is one of those states that is having to say, okay, if Medicaid goes away, or if a substantial amount of Medicaid goes away, where from our state budget where from our balanced state budget are we pulling those funds? And so frequently, and in Illinois' case, it's likely to be the case, that comes from higher ed budgets in particular, because that tends to be the biggest pot of discretionary funding in a state budget. So, all of these things are going to impact not only this immediate fiscal year, the subsequent school year, but will continue to have ramifications long term for the health and well-being and the education of our communities. We can go to the next slide, where we talk about what we have a little bit more influence over here in Illinois, which is our own state budget. So, the state passed, the legislature passed a state budget over the weekend, over May 31st, June 1st weekend. And, there were some cuts to the governor's proposed budget that ended up happening, but we've got some highlights here. What ended up in the final budget was a $307 million increase for evidence-based funding, which is down from the sort of annual $350 million that's been invested for the last several years. And the goal this year was also to invest an additional $350 million into EBF, but they were only able to commit $307 million. So unfortunately, we're not, that will slow us down on our progress to raising all districts across the state to adequate funding levels. There is a $1.5 million for implementation of the state's literacy plan, and they are in the process, ISB's in the process of developing a statewide numeracy plan in parallel to that. There's $30 million for the teacher vacancy pilot, which in previous years has been $45 million. The state was able to pass a $1.3 million increase for funding for CTE education, or that's redundant, sorry, career and technical education. ICCB is going to continue to get some dual credit funding, which they've been routing mostly through innovation grants out to their community colleges, but that's a little over $3 million. MAP got an increase of $10 million for state need-based funding. There's about $3 million total, just under $3 million total for the Common App implementation, which includes some direct admissions work, a pilot with some community colleges, and some other stuff. The Minority Teacher of Illinois Scholarship, Golden Apple, Aim High all had flat funding. So it was good to see that they did not get cut, but also difficult. It's a difficult fiscal environment. It would be great to be able to increase the amount of aid for college going students. And I'm realizing that I had 2 bullet points about. So now you know both that it's 2.9 million and just under 3 million. So that's the main takeaways from the budget. There will probably be another session this summer in the legislature because of what's happening at the federal level. And once we know kind of final budget numbers from the federal government, the legislature is likely to reconvene for a special session to specifically address some of those issues and address revenues and expenditures as a result and do some revisions. In terms of legislative session, a handful of things passed. This session was, we talked about this last meeting. There was a lot of conversation around higher ed in particular in this session. And interestingly, not everything on the left-hand column here, and obviously not everything on the left-hand column is the full universe of things that passed, but these are most relevant to this group. But interestingly, the kind of biggest ticket items were not the ones that made it through, despite the level of engagement and discourse around higher ed in the legislature this session. So what did pass was an amendment to the Dual Credit Quality Act. We are in conversation with our state agency partners and some other partners around what this means. There's really substantial changes to the Dual Credit Quality Act in this amendment. It functionally eliminates the model partnership agreement. It doesn't eliminate it as a thing that exists in the world, but it does eliminate the sort of requirement to use it as a default process if districts and colleges are having a hard time coming to agreement. It sets different timelines around initiating partnership processes. It also establishes some different processes around appeals for secondary districts to appeal in existing partnerships, appeal decisions from their community college partners. It also revises processes for out-of-state partnerships. The emphasis is on local partnerships, which it should absolutely be. And also there's going to be a lot of ripple effects of this one. So we are doing some processing of what it will mean down the line. The second thing to flag here is you all heard, I believe it was our last meeting, from Dr. Antoinette Taylor, who was previously involved in the chronic absence that was involved in the prior chronic absence task force, which she told us all about last time. As she highlighted in our meeting last time, chronic absenteeism is still a very robust issue in our schools and even more so in the wake of COVID. So the legislature passed a bill to reconvene a chronic absence task force to grapple with those issues and to provide some real recommendations and planning for how to address chronic absenteeism. ISB is now on deck to provide AI guidance to their districts. They can do so by engaging stakeholders to develop these recommendations. But really, as we've talked about previously, AI is impacting already how our schools function, how our students experience school. And so folks are really eager to get a lot of information about how do we grapple with these tools, and utilize them effectively and thoughtfully. And so ISB will be working on that guidance. I think they are due to provide it by, I think it's early summer 2026. SB 58 also passed. That is regional manufacturing partnerships to support sort of manufacturing pathways work. It's very similar to the the STAMP initiative that we've been working on for the last few years with DCEO and the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity in the state, as well as the Illinois Manufacturers Association. So if that ends up it's not currently appropriated. So until it gets appropriated, I think it won't really stand up. But if it can get an appropriation in the future, I think it can be a really powerful mechanism to facilitate some local partnerships around manufacturing and scaling those opportunities. And then two big higher ed bills that passed. One, the Direct Admissions Act, which involves our state higher education agencies facilitating, streamlining, and hopefully reducing the friction for students to be directly admitted or guaranteed admission to the pilot colleges, which I think are pretty much the what I like to call the directional universities. So the northern, southern, et cetera, universities based on GPA. And then the final bill that we're highlighting here is the STAR Act, the Student Transfer Achievement Reform Act, which has more transfer for direct transfer for major courses, et cetera, pieces in it. This builds on a few years of work on improving transfer in the state. And then I'll just note, there's a couple of big things that stalled, and they're primarily in the higher ed arena. The Community College Baccalaureate bill that was supported by the governor's administration just did not make it across the finish line. There was a lot of controversy over it out the gate, but then it was heavily negotiated. The universities got to neutral on it, but it couldn't quite make it over the finish line in time. That's not to say it won't get picked back up in the future. I presume that it will get picked back up in the future. And same goes for the adequate and equitable funding formula that has been a long labor for a lot of partners, both from advocacy organizations, but also from institutions and from various agencies to collaborate and think about how do we revise our higher ed funding formulas such that we are really doing so in an equitable fashion and able to reach students in an equitable fashion and make sure that students are supported with what they need. So the last thing I'll just highlight for this group here is Lumina, the Lumina Foundation, which was the source of the 60% by 2025 goal back in 2008, 2009. They have established a new goal around credentials of value. So that the way they're framing this is that by 2040, 75% of U.S. adults in the labor force have college degrees or credentials of value. And they define that by earnings that would be above the high school earnings benchmark by 2040. So in Illinois, I just grabbed a little screen grab from their report or from their dashboard page. They've got currently, 55.7% of associate degree earners earning that below or above that benchmark, 73.1 for bachelor's, 81.6 for graduate degrees. The challenge here will be sub-associate credentials and figuring out how we can measure that. But we were excited to see this framing around credentials of value and not just sort of credentials in and of themselves. The 60% by 2025 goal has been very powerful. And also, if it's not leading to meaningful economic change or improvement for students and families, then we're missing a piece of the puzzle there. So we are excited to sort of dive into this and think about how this might be able to support work in Illinois.
Awesome. Thank you, Emily, for that legislative and budget update, state and federal level, both critical updates to inform our work. So I wanted to shift gears a little bit and share some updates from the progress of the college and career pathway endorsement work group that Ed Systems hosted from early April through end of May. We had about 4 sessions with folks from all over the state representing their communities to not only share the challenges that they were experiencing in implementation, but also to come together and brainstorm solutions for both local practice and for state policy to expand implementation of CCPEs. So, of course, we know that CCPEs are embedded within WR Act as a critical way to enable students to have forward motion and momentum into their chosen pathway, whether it's into college, to career. And so each of the 4 components on the left, the 4 black boxes, individualized planning, career-focused instruction, work-based learning, and core academic readiness, all individually serve a student to become college and career ready, but in combination, really create this powerful experience for students that builds on, a lot of things that high schools are already doing throughout the state, but can give them that endorsement on their diploma to have that forward momentum and, in some situations, that currency to move forward into that career with those skills and experiences under their belt. So we know that in the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen expansion of the CCPEs earned across the state, but we also know that this isn't happening equitably across districts in the state. We know that these CCPEs are being predominantly earned in higher resource districts, predominantly white districts. And so we really wanted to kind of get under the hood of the implementation challenges in order to boost the student access piece of CCPEs and ensure that no matter your background, you have opportunities to succeed in this pathway endorsement and to take that to launch your career trajectory into the future. So our work group was focused on these key objectives. I won't read them all to you, but essentially we wanted to understand, center in the value of the individual components as well as their collective impact as a whole. We wanted to understand the barriers that students were facing in implementing, or that schools were facing in implementing these experiences, and therefore, challenges that students were facing in accessing these opportunities. We wanted to understand how this varied across different districts, different geographies across the state, so that we could then, share best practices that folks found success in, and we'll highlight some of those in a couple slides here in a moment, and really understand how we can create targeted solutions to face some of those challenges to implementation. So again, this is how our work group evolved over the 4 sessions. We began by norming on, the value that students experience from each of these components and, as a whole within the endorsement package. We figured out, we kind of put out on the table what are some of the roadblocks that schools and teachers and administrators are facing when designing these programs. We highlighted some success stories, so we'll highlight those in just a moment, of folks who've gotten creative and been able to work around some of the challenges that we had lifted up as a group. And then we also culminated our sessions in creating some brainstorm solutions, both on a local level and a statewide level, that we would, love to hear your feedback from today, but I'll also share an opportunity coming up next week for folks to dig in deeper to these proposed solutions and offer feedback on a more granular level. So as you may be familiar, the CCPE framework includes these 4 components that we touched on earlier, but we really wanted to take each component individually to understand, within the individual planning, what is challenging for folks within professional learning, what is, where is the friction coming in, where are their wins and where are there more challenging scenarios, career-focused instruction, of course, with the collaboration with dual credit, we, uplifted some challenges there, but of course, also understood the strengths that each of these components bring individually, and the academic readiness, of course, as well, not being kind of a new component, but rather tying in existing readiness indicators that districts are already tracking, and how that can kind of provide a bit of a win for folks in building a cohesive CCPE program across all departments of their institution. So within our first session and between our first and second session, we gathered feedback in the form of a written survey from folks who are participating. So we really just wanted to know, within each of the 4 components of CCPE, where are you facing the most difficulty? So As you can see from these pie charts, we have, easy is that light blue shade. The darker blue is somewhat easy. The orange, somewhat difficult. The red is difficult. And then gray is represented primarily by folks who participated in the group from maybe policy organizations, intermediary organizations who aren't directly implementing themselves, but participated in other aspects of the survey to share kind of the perspectives that they had gathered from their work with partners. And so, as you can tell from the general trends of these colors, we see that the individual planning and academic readiness, as I mentioned earlier, as these are already components that schools were implementing and that had, some years under their belt in tracking and collecting data and assisting students with that individual planning from a counselor perspective. These were, I won't say the easy components, but less difficult for schools to implement and feel that they were having success in within the CCPE framework. However, we did notice some, higher levels of difficulty within the implementation of professional learning. So we're thinking about those career development experiences, the 60 hours, the team-based challenges that folks express, challenges. We'll get into kind of the details of each of these challenge areas in a moment, but those were the areas we saw more of that red and orange of folks, raising a little bit of an alarm of this is valuable for students. And I see the, benefit for students in achieving these experiences and achieving the CCPE, but that from an implementer's standpoint, were kind of the most difficult to not only get off the ground, but to scale up to ensure equitable access across, various career paths, various student groups, things like that. So we synthesized the written responses from the survey to come up with these kind of 4 major takeaways in CCPE implementation. So first takeaway we heard from folks loud and clear is that the approval processes on the state level can really impede CCPE implementation. So we heard specifically around team-based challenges that folks, express frustration that, this is something that they wanted to design for their students and that they had buy-in from teachers already because they had existing frameworks of problem solving in the classroom, but that the actual process of getting it approved by ISB was frustrating and could delay a little bit of the momentum that had been building up to implement CCPE as a whole. The second takeaway from folks, and this was a major theme of our sessions, was the concept of partnership. So whether partnerships between secondary and post-secondary institutions, partnerships between secondary and industry, really are the cornerstone of CCPE. But with stretched resources, districts coming out of difficult years from the pandemic to now, folks were expressing that partnerships could be difficult to get off the ground, could be difficult to maintain, and from potential partners of the value of CCPE and what it can bring not only to the community, but to that specific employer or post-secondary institution. The third takeaway that folks expressed was the challenge in the various operations of CCPE. So we're thinking about how to fund CCPE, who on the school level is responsible for each of the components. What does transportation look like for work-based learning experiences? How do we track student data? Those kind of logistics and operations pieces that obviously are important to figure out, but that also shouldn't, at the end of the day, shouldn't be the barrier to allowing this opportunity for students at all. The difference between a rural district having only a couple of employers to work with versus maybe an urban or suburban district who has a plethora of partners available and maybe public transportation. can be the difference in access for that student in an urban suburban district versus a student in a rural district. And then finally, of course, as I just alluded to, all of these challenges kind of culminate and trickle down to impact student access and equity, which we will dive a little bit deeper in just a couple slides. So a little bit more detail in each of those buckets or major takeaways that I just expressed. In terms of the approval process, challenges folks were experiencing as a work group, we kind of put that to the side to understand that, yes, we do have some recommendations in that area, perhaps, a multi-year approval timeline so that schools aren't having to resubmit and focus on the application versus the student participation and continuous improvement lens. But for the purposes of our work group, we kind of put that one to the side and we're able to dive into these other three areas as they felt a little bit more within our locus of control of shifting policy and enabling change for student access. So the first, of course, as we mentioned, within partnerships, some of the difficulties that we encountered in our work group were, realities of rural districts and distances between not only secondary and post-secondary institutions, but also distance and availability of employer partners was a huge component of challenge for folks. Not only the distance, but if you do have partners who are close by or you do have that connection point, how do you market the CCPE? How do you express to employers the value for them to take on something as low touch as participation in a career fair, all the way to something as high touch as hosting a student for career development experience for maybe 20 or 30 hours. Of course, we have a whole array of issues within dual credit partnerships, whether it be teacher credentialing, all the way to availability or willingness of post-secondary partners to collaborate in this area. And then again, communicating CCPE to all partners, communicating the value of the endorsement, raising awareness on that level. So within operations, as I mentioned before, work group members expressed challenges in funding all of the different operations. So whether it's a specific coordinator within your campus who is responsible for career navigation or CCPE coordination, that is, not something that every district expressed having. And so it was challenging on that regard to be able to kind of put these responsibilities onto someone else's plate when we know school staff already are stretched very thin. Same thing goes for counselors. Folks, raise the point of school counselors being way over their caseload limits in terms of student number to counselor ratio. And so, of course, that makes it difficult for students to get that really dedicated one-on-one tailored support in navigating some of these decisions and decisions to take on opportunities like the CCPE. We also heard some challenges around the 60-hour requirement for those CDEs. We had some kind of creative solutions that we'll get to in a couple of slides in this respect. Again, ownership of components. Again, when you don't have maybe a necessarily dedicated person to CCPE within your building, that can present a challenge of who is owning what and who is responsible for each component. The time and the data of inputting all of this into some type of student platform where you can track progress and you can make students aware of maybe their progress along that pathway or the different opportunities that are open to them. And then, of course, transportation. In our previous work group last year, we kind of dove in deeper to some of the challenges in transportation across the state, but that is something, of course, that continues to be a pressing challenge when it comes to those career development experiences and industry partnerships. And then finally, on the student access side, we heard some challenges in terms of recruiting students and, expressing to students all of the different ways that this CCPE can benefit them and their career trajectory. Or, if students are only offered pathways in a certain, say, a CNA pathway that may tend to be more female student dominated, students may have to make that difficult choice between, an unpaid career development experience versus a paid part-time work at, any local business that may not be directly tied with CCPE. Of course, they're still getting those employability skills and work ethic and all those great things, but students having to make that kind of choice was creating a real barrier to equity in making sure that we open up access to all students. So some highlights I wanted to share, promising practices on a local level of some of our work group members. We had Jill Lavacek, Director of Innovation and Learning for Naperville. She really expressed the benefits she saw in student engagement, student attendance, student participation, and enthusiasm when they launched and scaled CCPE, specifically within curriculum embedded team-based challenges. So, really coming together as a collective of instructors and understanding, okay, how can we make sure that that team-based challenge is something that every student is getting maybe freshman or sophomore year, so that if they want to elect to go down this pathway, their pathway of choice, they already have that, under their belt, and that has already kind of opened their eyes to the excitement of solving a real-world challenge for an industry partner. She also expressed the kind of nature of the work of being that of shifting human systems. And so it's not necessarily creating this whole new suite of activities that didn't exist, but rather changing the way that industry partners think about student participation, changing the way that students think about high school as kind of a launch pad to college and career, and kind of just shifting those mindsets to enable more participation and more momentum for students. We also heard from Andrew Martin, Career Pathways Navigator at Highland Community College. He shared some of his experiences in bringing multiple partners to the table at once to really center on the student and create shared goals, coming prepared with, pitfalls, challenges, anticipating questions that folks may have, supplying resources ahead of time to really grease the wheels on those partnerships and ensure that folks have what they need when they are standing up these opportunities. And then finally, Erica Kuba, Career Coordinator at Des Plaines Valley Region EFE. She had some great ideas around, again, centering on student and the student experience, the student engagement that can come out of CCPE in order to generate buy-in from staff. So specifically having conversations with educators at the high school level to help them understand, how CCPE is already embedded in so much of the curriculum and so much of the ongoing daily practice of what a high school community offers, but that in her role as a career coordinator, she could kind of take the lift, take the logistic, take the operational burden so that teachers could focus more on the pedagogy, more on the creativity of inspiring students down their pathway of choice. And again, an overarching theme that Erica kind of hammered home for us was that we're not starting from scratch. We're not building this whole new CCPE framework out of nowhere. We're really working with what we have, starting with what we already have strengths in, and building from there to ensure that our students our experiences are authentic to student interest and that we aren't, reinventing the wheel So some of the solutions that folks had brainstormed, here we're thinking about partnerships specifically. So I've just flashed those challenges again on the left column for you to be reminded of kind of the challenges folks had surfaced in the work group. But I'll focus mostly talking through some of the solutions that folks had come up with within the work group. So the first, in terms of funding challenges, they surfaced the idea of state agency funding specifically to support engagement from the community colleges to really, dive in and take an invested approach in ensuring these partnerships get off the ground and are successful. And that also funding folks echoed could be really important for currency, something like a scholarship program for students who come into their doors with that CCPE on their diploma. We also heard some great creative ideas in terms of collaboration with the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, as well as the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation, in creating a module within their licensure processes to just highlight from the front end for new businesses in Illinois. This is an awesome opportunity that exists for you to really get involved with your local community and local emerging labor force. For students who are already invested in your region, who are already invested in your specific area of industry. And so really, could be a no-brainer for new businesses to want to tap into that young talent pipeline. Folks also supported the idea of state agency funds specifically around dual credit. So in those core and industry demanded courses to really expedite student or teacher credentialing and make sure that those courses are available to students that align with pathways and not just kind of random acts of dual credit, but really embedded within pathway models. Folks also had the idea of like a model business partnership template. So similar to what Emily mentioned as the model partnership agreement for dual credit, building on that model to, put out a template for schools and for industry to use to cover some of the, the language around these partnerships, to have some language around maybe risk or age of students, things like that, there are best practices within the state, but can save a lot of legwork for individual partners if something is already presented as this is a template that has worked for organizations prior. Take it, adapt it to your needs, and it's available to you. And then, of course, focus grants, especially in rural areas, to create partnerships with industry that may be virtual to kind of get creative in areas that may not have a ton of, local brick and mortar business partners, or school-based enterprises, embedding CCPE within the IT department at a school, embedding it within a school nurse's office, things like that, that can really provide rich opportunities for students, but that may not need to go beyond the school campus doors. Second bucket, some of the solutions around operations. So again, the challenge is around the left, but I'll kind of talk through some of the solutions that our work group members had surfaced. So first being mini grants to defray transportation costs specifically. That was a huge barrier, and folks voiced that perhaps was the most expensive component of CCPE implementation that could be alleviated with some of these mini grants specifically targeted for transportation. Folks indicated interest in some type of waiver for the 60-hour requirement, whether they can shift to more competency-based model or, adapt from the success of the CNA work experience being 40 hours, allowing folks to think a little bit more creatively about how they spread those hours over multiple experiences. Folks expressed desire for some type of statewide school level platform or suite of platforms that folks could use to support the individual planning and data collection that goes into CCPE. We had folks voice desire for stronger coordination between state agencies. That's definitely a policy recommendation that we can make to ensure that within the different state agencies that kind of have a hand in CCPE, that, if agencies are clear on kind of what's their purview, then school level folks can feel more clear about what their individual ownership is within the CCPE process. And then finally, another creative idea from folks was around collaborating with ISAC Corps to support CCPE advising. So ISAC Corps already having, great numbers across the state, great embed in, well embedded within school communities, strong level of trust and proximity to community schools, could really offer a valuable opportunity for students to learn more about CCPE and kind of explore their potential there. And then finally, on the student access and equity front, we heard a lot of interest in just elevating and centering student voice in the currency conversation, right? So we as kind of the adults can brainstorm all we want about what we think students want, but at the end of the day, students are going to follow what, makes sense to them in their career plan, their college plan. And so in order to design currency that really speaks to student need and student desire and student ambition, it's really essential to center student voice in those conversations and determine specifically what drives student decision making when it comes to college and career. Folks also articulated perhaps the possibility for extension of the 1-year renewal process for CCPE to maybe 2 or 3 years, with touch points in between to focus more on continuous improvement. So who is accessing your pathway? How many students? What are the demographics of these students? What are their prior courses that they've taken? What are their post graduation plans? And making sure that we have a wide array of student and student experiences covered in terms of access to CCPE. We heard some great ideas around student and family facing marketing to really articulate to students the value in achieving the CCPE for their diploma and for their families too, to understand the benefits it can reap in the future in terms of their college and career aspirations. And then finally, subsidies and perhaps utilization of work study dollars for those CDE wages, for especially in those unpaid pathways, so that students don't have to make that difficult choice between a part-time job outside of school versus potentially a paid or subsidized wage role within their school community. So if you would like to hear more about these and discuss with folks who are in the work group, I invite you to join us next Wednesday from 10 to 11 a.m. We'll be diving in deeper to these recommendations and really kind of kicking the tires on the ideas folks have had to then be able to formally present them in writing and kind of get the ball moving on the policy front to enable some of these changes to inform future CCPE success. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to that session next week. But for now, so I'll go ahead and put that link if anybody is interested in the chat for folks to register for that session next week. I would love to have you. But now I will turn it over to Danya to share a new resource for work-based learning.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Madeline. And thank you for sharing all of this incredible work that y'all are doing with the CCPE work group. It's definitely something that I'm interested in my role, and I'll bring up how it ties to my portion of the presentation in a moment. But quickly, hi, everybody. My name is Danya Ibrahim. I was the one that said in the chat that I wanted to be a singer when I was in pre-K. And unfortunately, that's not what I'm doing right now, but I am extremely happy and very fulfilled getting to be an innovation manager here with Ed Systems. And that actually ties right into what we'll be talking about today. Many of you might have heard of our Illinois Work-Based Learning Innovation Network. Essentially, it's an initiative through Ed Systems that gets to bring together communities from all across the state to highlight innovative models in work-based learning and really get to center the practitioner's voice and get to hear from you all so that y'all can share ideas with one another and continue to build connections with each other and engage in conversations about how to create high quality experiences for your students. And so many of you may have heard of this hub, but it's something that we're going to be diving into a little bit more today. We, throughout time, have built up entireties of pathways across the work-based learning continuum, resources across manufacturing, health sciences and technology, and education. And something that we've done recently is build out an entire continuum of resources for information technology as a continuum that as a pathway that is continuing to grow. And so in each of these work-based learning continuums that we provide resources across career awareness, career exploration, team-based challenges, and career development experiences as we move down, that continuum of engaging more closely with hosts and employers. And what we have in this resource is models from people all across the state that we reached out to that are engaging now in IT work-based learning in their schools. We largely reached out through our Accelerated Model Pathways in IT initiative, AMPIT, for many of you who might have heard of that initiative, and reached out to those communities that have been engaging in this IT work in their districts, and many of them have received CCPE approvals and are now sharing that work so that others can learn from it. And so, what I'm going to share with you all today. These partners that have shared this work encourage you to adapt their models and encourage you to be able to take from them so that, as Erica Kuba mentioned in our CCPE and the CCPE work group earlier, should always not be starting from scratch. It's always good to be starting from what we know works for other communities. And so this is really here for you all to be able to engage with that and build from what others have done. As I mentioned earlier, we've built out these full continuums of resources for several different pathways. Like I mentioned, education, health sciences, and manufacturing. So here we find our IT work-based learning continuum. And again, organized across the continuum of experiences. And so you'll see that folks have provided details about the kind of career exploration that they provide and what they do, and typically even what time of year, who they might partner with. And so that's something that we encourage you to take a look at and get ideas from. And something that we're also particularly excited about is here under team-based challenges. We specifically, as another thing that was mentioned in the CCPE work group, a challenge that folks are having is with approvals right now, especially with team-based challenges. And so for this component in particular, we were intentional to ensure that each of these examples are something that was approved in the last 2 years by ISB as a part of the CCPE. So anything you see here under these team-based challenges resources was something that these communities were approved under. And so you can see that you'll get their authentic problem statement and the context for the challenge, the approximate team size. And even for some of these examples, we were given, like this example from Belvedere D100, we were given details such as which essential employability competencies are being assessed and the potential final solution projects. And so this is really something we hope that you can take a look at, engage with, see what their authentic problems look like, relate it to what you're trying to offer at your school, and continue to tweak your team-based challenges as you, build out pathways, if you're building out pathways in IT, to continue to be able to offer opportunities that are both CCPE approved and high quality. And then, of course, we also have career development experiences. Again, varying levels of information and detail from different schools. But for some of them, you could even click on links that they've given us. So, for example, for North Grand High School, who put together a Code Nation internship, you could even click on this link, which will take you to a full description of their work, a sample jQuery project that they sent out to the students, and even a career development experience template that they utilized through IWIN that describes the endorsement area, the description of the CCPE, and some more details like about how students are receiving credit and how the CDE is being delivered. And so all of this is here on this IWIN website for you to engage with and to be able to utilize if you are interested in building out an IT pathway yourself. And there are lots of other resources that I've just sent in the chat here to engage in the full IWIN resource hub. As you engage in this resource hub, like I mentioned earlier, it's really a place that highlights y'all's voices from people across the communities, across the state. It's really a place for y'all to be sharing what works for you. And so we encourage you, take a look at that website, see what resonates with you. And if you need some support in navigating the website, I've also linked in here our IWIN 101 that really just walks through the different kinds of resources that we provide, shows you how to use the resource library, and shows you how to engage with IWIN. And so we hope that you'll get to use that resource. We hope that it is helpful for you and that some of the other resources on the website are also beneficial. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. My name is Dominique Janvier. I am one of the data analysts on the data team here at EdSystems. Very happy to be here with you all today. And there was an opening to give a little bit of an update on what we've been doing with the Success Network dashboard. So I really just have one slide. I'm going to be giving a demo of a new view that we added to the CTE participation dashboard. And then we also have a request for feedback from you all. So there has been a request for a bit to add an EFE view, Education for Employment view, to the CTE participation dashboard. So we were finally able to do that in the past couple of months. I wanted to start with the Success Network website, just in case some of you haven't yet accessed the dashboard. You can access it by going to the resources page and then the data dashboard. And then the particular dashboard that we've updated with the information is the CTE participation dashboard. So if you've been to this dashboard before, it looks pretty much the same. You have the map in the middle with all of the districts. You have the filters on the left, and then you have tables on the right. The only update is that we've actually added a table. Oh, accidentally clicked it. Added a table for the EFEs. So what I've done here is I've aggregated the data from the districts into their respective EFEs. This also includes area career centers as well. And then this number here is just the percentage of students who participated in an ECTE program based on the school year. So for example, in the Bonn, Fayette, Effingham EFE and school year 2024, 74.7% of students in that EFE participated in a CTE program. So there's that. You could click through, scroll through this list. And then if you wanted to see a more detailed view of the EFE, you can just click on it. And then this view is very similar to if you were to review the data by district or leadership community. It'll navigate you to a page that shows you participant and concentrator trends and demographics by EFE. So in this top chart here, we have longitudinal data by school year. These are the school years that are available from ISB, much like the rest of the dashboard. This data is through the report card. So we have this top line is percent participants, and the bottom is percent concentrators. On the left-hand side, you can filter by EFE, and you can also filter by career cluster. And then at the bottom here, we have some additional charts and additional filters that are only for this chart, disaggregating everything by demographic. So again, I know we've been wanting this for a while, and was really happy to be able to provide this new feature based on the feedback that we had gotten from the committee and then also from network members. So I'll stop sharing and we can actually go back to the slides. The last thing I wanted to add here is that we have a request for feedback. One of the ways that we sort of innovate on the dashboard is by getting feedback, both informal and formal, from the network and from meeting spaces like this. So there will be a few questions in the exit ticket if you are able to take that, particularly asking you if you use the dashboard, how you use it in your work, and then what new or existing features would most help you with your work. So would really love to hear from you. And yeah, thank you. I think that's it. Thank you, Madeline.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. All right. So to kind of wrap us up, it being the beginning of summer, we are excited to just share some reports and writings that have been a little top of mind for us and kind of framing our thinking for the fall and new upcoming school year. So the first from Advanced CTE, this report around the state of career technical education, credentials of value. So this has been valuable for us in thinking about, how we expand not only access to varying types of credentials, but ensuring that they are credentials of value and that they offer students, tangible benefits and improvements in their job prospects and career aspiration. So that is a great report that we highly recommend checking out. Next, from a local partner in Illinois, Partnership for College Completion, they recently published the Seamless Success Report, Transforming College Transfer in Illinois. So, of course, in central to all of this work, in ensuring students have plethora of career and college opportunities is making sure that students can easily and successfully navigate from different institutions without, taking on extra cost, taking on extra, coursework that, delays their time to completion. And so that highly recommend checking out this report. I had the opportunity while I was an intern with Partnership for College Completion to support with some of the research and student interviews. It's really student-centered, and you hear a lot of student testimonial in that report. So I highly recommend that one as well. And then recently, Public Agenda released this analysis of Illinoisans' views on public education, higher education specifically. So this can be a really valuable asset in conversations with folks around some of the federal cuts and changes to higher education. We, within this report, see that, majority of Illinoisans really believe that higher education should be open and accessible to all. And so there's some really great tidbits in here to help frame, emerging conversations, campaigns, discussions with folks in the field and even beyond the field of education, and expressing the value that higher education has for us throughout the state. And then this last piece here, the Lumina Foundation strategic plan for 2025 to 2040 that Emily touched on at the top of the call, really valuable tool in thinking about how we assess our success along metrics of student success post-secondary and post-college into their careers with, how successfully students are able to integrate into the workforce and have quality, well-paying jobs. So that is a great report as well to just frame our thinking in that respect as well. So when these materials are shared after the meeting on our policy committee website, you'll see each of these is clickable. So you can click the image to access the report, and happy reading. I know it's some light beach reading, but if you are looking for some inspiration or reframing in how you think about education policy in the state of Illinois, these are some great places to start. And then, of course, we're always looking for speakers and organizations to showcase, districts, communities to showcase within our policy committee. So if you have an idea, maybe our conversation today has sparked an idea, or you've been thinking about a certain community or leader in your space who would be wonderful to spotlight in this kind of statewide forum, we would love to hear your ideas around potential speakers or showcases for policy committee into the fall and winter. So that'll also be part of the exit ticket, which I will share in just a moment. And it looks like we'll be able to give you all some time back this morning. But just as a flag for our next policy committee meeting, we will have late September 24th. It's a Wednesday from 9:30 to 11 a.m. So you can check out the policy committee website for all recordings of past meetings, materials, slides, published resources. You can also opt into emails there. But in just a moment, I will share that link for registration for the fall meeting. And I'll also share our exit survey. So if you would be so kind, we would love your feedback on today's policy committee, as well as the questions that Dominique posed around the data dashboard. So I will go ahead and launch that poll for everyone. Just 5 questions. If you want to take just a few minutes to share your thoughts on this. And then again, thank you so much for your time this morning. And we look forward to engaging with you in the future. Have a wonderful summer, and we will hope to see you soon.